Hey everyone, it's Strange Michael. I hope you're doing well today. I have a review for the final, at the current moment, Fear Street movie, of course, based on the original R.L. Stine books. I think I forgot to say this in my Part 2 review and Part 1 review. Reviewed both of those movies as well, just in case you're curious about my thoughts on the other parts of this trilogy. I never read much Fear Street. I've read the Silent Night 1, 2, and 3 books, and I think I read something else, maybe like a Halloween-themed book or something. But I also read 1 or 2 of the Ghosts of Fear Street books, were kind of like the Goosebumps books versions of Fear Street. Fear Street was really popular back in the 80s, mainly. Kind of the 90s too, but mainly the 80s. Then Goosebumps kind of came along in the 90s and took over, also from R.L. Stine. I'm a big Goosebumps guy, but I've never really been a big Fear Street guy for my small amounts of exposure so far, even though I own quite a few R.L. Stine and his Point Horror series books. And I was a little nervous going into this Netflix trilogy, mainly because I had heard really great things, but it's also Netflix, so I expected a lot of things. A lot of negative things, if you will. My walls kind of went up. And here I am reviewing part 3 of this particular trilogy. These films were released basically a week within each other, which was kind of surprised with the same director and writers and all that. Very impressed with that aspect. I actually think that was a really good move from Netflix to do it that way. Very smart, very creative in a lot of ways, but very flawed. The whole trilogy is very flawed. This particular movie is probably my least favorite of the trilogy at this current moment. This one is Fear Street Part 3, 1666. This is almost 2 hours long. Of course, this whole trilogy came out in 2021 on Netflix directly, not physical media. I don't even know if I would buy most of this trilogy. I would buy Part 2 for sure. 1978, that's a phenomenal film. So the films kind of keep working backwards. The first film was 1994, second film takes place in 1978, as I said. The third film here, 1666, as the title seems to hint at. This one picks up immediately after Part 2's events, but Part 2 is not entirely 1978. We kind of have an end cap and epilogue at the end of that movie, going back to the 1994 story, and something happened, basically, where Dina, her brother, and the girl that was tied into telling the story in Part 2, who I don't want to spoil, her name or her identity or anything. It's very important for that particular movie. Those characters have another situation where basically Dina, who I can't stand, it's the biggest problem with 1994 as a movie, was Dina's character. She's just awful. She's an awful character. Her girlfriend Samantha is still possessed at this point, at the beginning of this film. They're trying to figure out how to solve her situation. And Samantha I really like. I actually care about that character. But Dina I can't stand. But Dina has like a mental vision thing at the end of Part 2 where she's taken back in time to the days of Sarah Fear when she was accused of being a witch and all of this stuff. You know, the person who basically put the curse on Fear Street. And more so than Part 2, we delve into the history of Fear Street, Shadyside, Sunnyvale, whatever you would like to call all of that, and the curse surrounding Sarah Fear, her identity, what happened with her and whatever. But this is the thing. Dina, the actress playing Dina, in the 1994 segments, is playing Sarah Fear here. Her brother is playing Sarah Fear's brother in the story. And they feel so out of place because this community is very Irish. Everybody has an Irish accent in this, and I will tell you, being Irish, oh my god, it was horrible. These kids, I understand this is a teen drama. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be obviously Irish. But for the sake of quality, for the sake of this weirdness that people have about like appropriation and stuff, what in the world? What in the world is wrong with you people? That was not a good Irish accent from anybody, specifically Dina, who's playing Sarah Fear and Dina, whoever this actress is. God. And even back in the day in 1666, Sarah Fear, played by the chick who plays Dina, again, she is acting like a girl boss in 1666 in an Irish community here in America. What the hell are you talking about? Bad choices. Bad choices. Modern day rewriting of history. It's just bad. In my personal opinion, I think it's ridiculously bad. But that's like only half of the movie. That's really only the first hour of this movie is focused on the Sarah Fear story. And I'll admit, there's some twists in there that were kind of nice. There's a lot of, like, woke nonsense in there that ties back to 1994's movie. In 1978, had pretty much none of that. And it was so good. It was so good. It had great characters. It had great tension and gore and kills. It was a Friday the 13th homage. everything about that second movie was so good. And even 1994 had some things to offer, like how it was basically a Scream movie in the first, like, third of the movie. Those films have, good things about them. 1666, for me, really loses me between the characters, how half of the movie's focused on the Sarah Fier story, the other half goes back to focusing on the 1994 Dina, Samantha, the brother storyline, which is okay. It's fine. It's about on par with the 1666 portion of this movie. I'm not really into it, if I'm being honest with you. And frankly, I feel like this might be the weakest for me, in my personal taste, of this entire trilogy. I would almost rather watch Part 1 than watch this, because I think 1994, being a 90s looking flick, the kind of cool twist with how the blood stuff works in that movie. I won't spoil that for you, but in case you haven't seen that movie and you're watching this review for some reason, the blood thing is really cool. I really like that. It's a unique twist on slasher stuff. I really dig that. It's a unique twist on a ghost story, as a matter of fact. I've never seen that done before. Very creative, and I will give this Netflix trilogy credit for that. This film, 1666, the casting is off, the accents and acting are off, the directing is off with that. The directing, in my personal opinion, isn't as good and as sleek as Parts 1 and Part 2. In my personal opinion. That's just me. Still good, but not as good as Part 1 and Part 2's directing style. It is what it is. It's trying to have like a witchcraft story in the 1660s. And personally, I don't think it's as good as I wanted it to be. I really don't think the twists were as good. They kind of make certain character actions in 1978 for characters that were in Part 1 and Part 3 not make sense. Particularly for a big character twist for a particular person that you probably know if you've seen this trilogy. That, for me, poorly written, in my opinion. I really think Part 1 and Part 3 are massive missteps, but I think Part 2 really held its own, in my opinion. The look of the film, the cinematography, the shots of like 1666, that community, that village in that Sarah Fier storyline looks realistic. It reminds me of The Witch, if you've seen that, the newer horror film that everybody loves, and I'm like the only person who feels kind of wish-washy about it. Looks beautiful, looks very authentic as a real 1660s village. I'll give it credit for that too. The costume design and all that, fantastic. Looks really, really good. The modern day stuff with the mall and everything, I think all of that stuff looks really good in the second half of the movie. The 1994 storyline, by the way, I don't think really to me, it doesn't make a very satisfying ending, in my opinion. I'm glad that it went back to that storyline to really resolve the Sam and Dina situation, specifically for the sake of Sam, because I think the actress is good. I think the writing was good for Sam as a character in Part 1. But it's got some okay things in there, but it doesn't really end on a satisfying note to me. This feels like a cheap ending. I don't know how to explain it. It feels like a very MTV trilogy, which is fine, whatever. It's teen entertainment. I don't mind that as long as it's good and well written and creative. And the creative part, I think they really get down. The style of all three of these films, I think they really get down. But overall, it kind of loses me in a lot of ways, in my personal opinion. I just don't think it's what it needs to be. Let's talk about the CGI/practical effects when they have that. I think both look really good. When you have certain effects, I think they look fantastic for the most part. There's one particular scene involving the Sarah Fier urban legend that we've heard through the first two films about her losing her hand. Supposedly she cut off her own hand. And the effect involving that scene is fantastic. It is fantastic. This film is the least bloody compared to Part 1 and Part 2. But the gore effects, when they're there for the stuff in here, or some of the CGI effects in this, they're fantastic. They look really good, and that is another thing I will give all three parts of this trilogy props for. This to me is the least watchable of all three movies. But that doesn't mean it's necessarily entirely bad. I just think a lot of elements in it are really bad. There's not really as much atmosphere as Part 1 and Part 2 had. And if you watched my review for Part 1 and Part 2, Part 1 I was very meandering on. I did not love that film at all. I think it's a very poor movie in a lot of ways, but not a horrible movie. It's watchable. Part 2 I thought was phenomenal. I loved that film. I thought it was amazing for what it was as a standalone flick, kind of, within this trilogy. For what it was as a Friday the 13th homage, once again, I thought it killed it. I thought everything about that flick was phenomenal, dude. The slasher elements were great. This film leans away from the slasher elements in a lot of ways, and I don't hate it for that. I thought it tried something different, and it worked, sort of, in some ways. But the film itself, with all the other flaws I've mentioned, it really kind of falls apart for me, especially as the ending of a trilogy. The music, let's talk about the music briefly. Most of this film taking place in 1666, they're not going to be playing things like Busta Rhymes and Little John. So you're not going to have things like that in here. You're not going to have the great hits of the 70s like the second film had, nor are you going to have the great hits of the 90s until you get to the second half of the film and you have like one montage scene involving a 90s song that all of us know. And that's okay. That's okay. But the music here, it's not really soundtrack stuff per se, but the score that's made for the film, I don't think is that great either. It's kind of fine, I guess. It's kind of like the filler score stuff for Part 1 and Part 2. It's okay. It's okay. Even though I think Part 2 did that better with the Friday the 13th Manfredini score that they made for that, which was really just engaging and really nice and complimented that film a lot. But overall, when it comes to Part 3 of the Fear Street trilogy, 1666, as you can tell, I'm not a big fan. This is my least favorite of the trilogy. I will be making a ranking video for the films, from worst to best in my personal opinion and taste, in the next couple of videos. We'll see. It might take a couple of days for me to get around to that, because I have some other things I want to do today, some little bits of cleaning I have to finish up and whatever. I need to shave. Oh, my neck itches because of it. But anyway, when it comes to this particular movie, 1666, you have to watch the entire trilogy to understand this movie, for sure. For sure. But I still think it drags. It's a really draggy, in my opinion, poorly paced film that as soon as you get to the halfway mark, and we go back to the modern day setting, or at least the 1994 setting, the pacing amps up so quick that it just kind of messes with the movie, in my opinion. But I actually fell asleep at one point in this film, in the third act. I fell asleep, and I had to wake up and rewind and watch all of that again to try to really recap on what I missed. I think that says a lot about this film, in my opinion. 1666 is not a good finale, in my opinion. It has its moments. It really does have its moments. I don't want to seem like I'm just bashing the thing apart, but it's weak, man. It's really weak. It's almost underneath average at some points, in my opinion. But overall, when it comes to 1666 of the trilogy of Fear Street Netflix movies, if I had to rate this one on a 5-star basis, I think I'd give Fear Street Part 3, 1666, probably a 3 out of 5 stars. But again, it's probably my least favorite of all of them. It's a weak movie, man. A really weak movie. I was surprised when I saw my friend Spongy say that this was his favorite in the previous comment section when we talked about Part 2. But, you know, everybody likes what they like, and that's cool. But I didn't love this. I thought it was alright, you know? But, you know, it depends on your taste, too. Maybe if you're more into witchcraft movies, maybe you like that, or this movie, more than Part 1 and Part 2, since they're more slasher-focused. But it is what it is. Anyway, thank you all for watching, guys. God bless you all. Let me know your thoughts and comments on Part 3 and the whole trilogy down in the comments section down below. Thank you for watching. God bless you again, and goodbye.